Good afternoon and welcome everyone to today's event on Saudi Arabia at the UN in 2024, Women's Rights and the Prosecution of Minorities. This event is sponsored by MENA Rights Group and ALQST for Human Rights and with the support of the Canton of Geneva. In the past years, Saudi Arabia has introduced numerous reforms aimed at promoting women's rights in the country, such as lifting the driving ban on women and amending the male guardianship system. These advancements are being portrayed as a positive step before the international community and have been at the center of Saudi Arabia's efforts to improve its image following the murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. However, human rights organizations and the United Nations mandate holders have documented a drastically different reality and have found that the Saudi government is in fact involved in human rights violation against women and minorities in the country. Since 2017, the Saudi authorities routinely targeted women's rights defenders and subjected them to arbitrary detention, enforced disappearance, and torture. In addition, the authorities have displaced local tribal populations to make way for the construction of mega projects and imprisoned and sentenced them to death for those protesting their evictions. The Saudi authorities also continue to prosecute members of the Shi'a religious minority by detaining and executing those involved in protests, including minors. On October 9, 2024, Saudi Arabia was reviewed by the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination against Women and Girls. And on November 27 and 28, Saudi Arabia was also reviewed by the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. On this occasion, this event will bring together Saudi human rights defenders to discuss Saudi Arabia's record in light of its obligations under the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination against Women and Girls and the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. It is now my pleasure to start the conversation with our panelists. Today with us are Lina Al-Hathloul, Head of Monitoring and Advocacy at ALQST for Human Rights, Joey Shi'a, the researcher for Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates at Human Rights Watch, Mariama Dosari, Senior Professor at the Royal Holloway University of London. Her research is in gender inequality in the Middle East with specific focus on Saudi Arabia, and Yahya Asiri, Saudi human rights defender and founder of ALQST for Human Rights. Welcome everyone.
Thank you.
On 9th of October, Saudi Arabia was reviewed by the CEDAW. It issued its concluding observations a few weeks ago. Lina, could you tell us a little bit more about what exactly the CEDAW review is, its content, and the concluding observations?
Sure. Thank you so much, Julia. I think it's very important for people to understand what happens at the UN. I think it's becoming more and more a bubble. So the CEDAW committee is a UN committee made of independent experts. They basically review the implementation by signatory states of the Convention for the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. And it's basically experts who will listen to what each state has to say about its implementation of this convention. And then also listen to civil society, and based on that, they will do their recommendation. Each state is reviewed more or less every 5 years. This year, we were in Geneva talking to the experts to give them an overview of what happened these last 5 years regarding women's rights. There are different, so it's 2 days basically. The first day, it's a public event in which civil society speaks to the experts. We have a public statements, and then they ask questions we can answer, and then we can also give them written answers to their questions. And the national human rights institutions are also present and can be asked questions. Then the second day, there are private meetings with the experts where they would ask us details about some cases that could constitute, very illustrate what is happening in the country. It's more of, I I would say it's really where they get the genuine information that we've been working on for years. And then the state, so Saudi Arabia, this year represented by the Saudi Human Rights Commission, gave its statement, going article after article of that convention and saying how what they've achieved and how they made efforts to implement the convention. And then the experts of the committee also asked the state some questions that are sometimes also based on what civil society has informed them. And I would say it's quite challenging sometimes for the state as well. I mean, when we were there and we saw that the Saudi Human Rights Commission was sometimes pushed back on what they had to say on some issues, I found it very interesting. The process was very interesting. For this year, so the committee has delivered its observations, and I won't get into too many details because it's quite long. But the main points they've raised are women human rights defenders and the prosecution of women human rights defenders not being able to work to improve women's rights situation in the country. The use of the death penalty against women, and especially migrant workers. The lack of protection for migrant domestic workers. The persistence of a de facto male guardianship system when the Saudi state was saying that they've completely abolished it. The committee pushed back and saying that, for example, in your personal status law, you actually speak about obedience of a woman to her husband. So how is that? How can you say that it's been completely abolished? So I think that these are the main topics they've really covered in their concluding remarks. This is what the CEDAW is.
Thank you very much for this overview, Lina. And I think you somewhat have a bit of a personal history or family history with the committee because in 2018 it was your sister Lujain who was in Geneva to brief the members of the committee, and after her return she was arrested and imprisoned. Now in 2024 you kind of took her footsteps. Can you tell us a little bit more about the situation of your sister and what your experience was, like your personal experience sort of speaking with the members of the committee and being present for the review?
It's a bit difficult really to speak about this, but so when my sister Lujain actually was in Geneva in 2018 at the CEDAW for the CEDAW review, she was not like me being public, so she did not have any public statement actually. She was there as an observer and basically tweeting and fact-checking what the Saudi authorities had to say on the implementation of the convention. And on Twitter, she was live streaming everything and basically countering their arguments. So that was in 2018, and she went back to. She used to live between Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and she was arrested a couple of weeks after, kidnapped basically, and brought back to Saudi. Forcibly disappeared for 4 days. Then they informed her, or she found out that she has a travel ban, so she couldn't leave the country. And then in 2 months after, they arrested her, and then the whole story. But I don't know if I should go into details about her story now. But
maybe just a very very quick overview for those viewers who don't know and what her situation is today.
Okay. So when Lujain was arrested, we didn't know why she was arrested. She was arrested without a warrant, without being informed. They just broke into the house, they took her. And at the moment they arrested her, they also arrested the group of the most prominent feminists of the country. And they were all over the newspaper saying that they're traitors with their picture and labeled as traitors. And we didn't really know what they were charging them with. And Mohammed bin Salman himself then said that he has evidence of her being a traitor and an agent. And it was only a year later almost that she received her official charges, which mention her speaking to Human Rights Watch, to Amnesty, to diplomats, the UK, the Netherlands, and the EU. And so all of the charges really are about her human rights work, and nothing is about her being an agent. So they were basically explicitly mentioning that her activism was considered now as terrorism in the country. And yeah, just long story short, during her imprisonment, she was forcibly disappeared for months. She was put in solitary confinement for 9 months. She was tortured and then released and put on a travel ban, and she remains on a travel ban.
Thank you, Lina. Yeah, it's a very harrowing example of what human rights and women's rights activism can lead to in Saudi Arabia. Maybe on that note, I could ask you, Mariam, as well, if you could tell us a little bit about what it means to be sort of a woman in Saudi Arabia today, and how gender still shapes the aspects of social and political life in Saudi.
Thank you so much. Historically, women have been facing a lot of control, and that's imposed by the state. So historically, for years and years, women have to ask for a male guardian to leave the country and so on. And I'll talk a little bit about how the changes that's happened. And those kind of segregation was imposed by the state, but also monitored by the community for years and years and years. And imposed also through education, where women when even education started, there's a lot of ideas that reinforce that women's role is in the society. So the society and enforced by the state adopted this idea that woman is the holder of the family honor. Woman is the holder of even the tribe honor, which put a lot of control and certain expectation in women, and obviously their behavior were controlled and so on. And that's for generation. And then we saw what happened after that. After 9/2 events happened and started where women moved from being controlled to women being used as an image to show that there is progress. First in 9/11, in King Abdullah time, when 9/11 happened, there was a lot of international pressure in his time. So he appointed a few women in the council, what is it called? The Shura Council, and open scholarship for women, but still all the laws was controlling women, including the male guardianship, and all of this woman doesn't drive and all of that. So it was just basic reform to show that the West were doing something, and women here is used against as an image. And then in time Mohammed bin Salman, because of for two reasons, again women have been used to say that there is empowerment and there is a progress, because he faced also international pressure after murder of Khashoggi, and another reason also the Vision 23 that have been created to open for investors to come and invest in Saudi Arabia. And one of the elements of that is that women would be part of the society, more visible in the society. And that's created a lot of first woman going, being a chef, first woman being an ambassador. So a lot of tokenism have been happening, and doesn't represent everyone in the society. And you see the Western media always captured that, and that's used to cover the repression that's happening in Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Mariam. Could you maybe also talk a little bit about sort of the recent introduced reforms on women's rights, and maybe touch upon the personal status law, and whether that is like sufficient reform or not?
Yes. So Vision 23 was introduced in 2016, and one of the elements of it is increasing women in the labor market. And what happened that almost more than 500,000 women entered the labor market, First, and everything was quite rushed and no systematic change is happening. So Saudi Arabia historically have a lot of attempt to Saudization of the labor, which means that replace expat with Saudis, and itself it's a problematic, but also the unemployment is extremely high in Saudi Arabia, and half of the population is women. So what they did, they basically replace unskilled expat with women, and some of them are highly qualified, but because they are employed and they need the money, they enter the job. First, they created what we call feminization of jobs. So certain sectors were feminized, where they put segregation, and women work in separating men, so like call centers, shops, luxury shops, and so on. And for a while, women entered the labor market, no career progress, very limited jobs that was available. And after that, segregation was removed, extremely in a rush matter, without introducing system to protect women who enter the labor market. So what we see, and I did research in that, increase of harassment, and women is quite in the middle, caught in the middle. If they reported, there is no system. If they reported their managers to protect them, and if they reported their family, the easiest solution is would be like don't work, and some of them most of them need the money, and also sometimes some of them will face violence from the family, and there is again no system to protect them from violence that they face in the system, and that's from the labor perspective. In terms of regulation and law, guardianship were modified and not completely removed, although in the news a lot of them they say, oh, finally guardianship will end in Saudi Arabia, but it was basically very little modification for the Western eyes. So the guardianship, 20 women who is above 21 years old can travel with a male guardianship, but in the same time, and this shows the contradictory between the changes they introduced. If her male guardian say that she is disobedient, they can cancel her travel or her passport, and she can't leave the country. And just recently, we have the personal status law that actually presented as a good progress, supposedly as a good progress in the kingdom, but in reality, it's codified a lot of the guardianship rules in law. So while women can register birth, marriage, but she cannot still get married without the consent of the guardian. Another thing that while she can travel without the permission, if they emphasize in the personal status laws the idea of obedience. And this is open to the judge. What does obedience mean? There is no clear definition. What does obedience by law mean? So if the husband or the father or whoever the guardian say that she is disobedient, all those rights that supposedly have been imposed can be withdrawn very quickly.
Thank you. Yeah, that definitely paints a very different picture to what we...
And last thing, I
please
just remember that because it's quite important. I was just talking to it about someone. Dar al-Ra'aya, which is the care, well, I don't know how to translate, the care house.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a woman shelter if you face violence from your family. And this is a massive example of the failure of the system to protect women. And still operate until now, and it's basically a detention center. If a woman, let's say, left the house because she's facing violence from member family, or even tried to run away, and they sent her to a judge can send her to Dar al-Ra'aya, which is the house of care, the irony of the name. And in this centers, women, and I posted quite a good report on how women physically and mentally is torture in those centers. And you cannot leave those centers or shelters without the male guardian permission. And this male guardian could be your abuser, but still you cannot leave it until the male guardian allowed it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think very good to know that there's no such thing as like independent shelters for women where they can really seek protection, but that there are only these like pseudo detention facilities for women. Yeah, definitely painting a very different picture to sort of what we hear from Saudi Arabia on the progress made with regards to women's rights. Maybe we can kind of move a little bit to the review by the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So that review happened on the 27th and 28th of November. The concluding observations will soon be published. This was an opportunity for Saudi civil society to advocate for the rights of the Shia population, local tribal populations, and migrant workers. Yahya, maybe I could ask you, we see that the Shia population in Saudi Arabia is specifically targeted, especially those who've participated in the demonstrations of the Eastern Province back in 2011. Could you tell us more about the treatment of the Shia population in Saudi Arabia? How are they discriminated against in law and in practice?
Yeah. I'll try to summarize the issue with the Shia as much as possible. So, all the time there is discrimination against the Shia, but recently it's increased on the ground. But on the picture, as Mariam said about using the women for the image, they used some Shia for the image as well. So they success with the PR, success strongly with the PR, and they used some of the Shia minority. They sometimes we believe they tried to bring some of the Shia close to the regime to use them against their people, but sometimes they brought some people they don't have any credibility with the Shia minority, and they put them in Shura Council or put them very close to the regime and asking them to appear in the TV and to say to the people, especially to the Western allies around the world, look at those Shia, they are spokes on behalf of the regime, they are represent the regime, they are available everywhere, but those individuals, they are completely coming from the Shia background, but they are against their people. So this is one thing. The second thing, in the biggest two cities have the majority for the Shia, Al-Qatif and Al-Ahsa, they have two, which called Husseiniya for the Shia, two registered legal Husseiniya, and they used to celebrate or to do the worship with Ashura and their time. They used to do it especially in Qatif. Last year, the discrimination increased dramatically, and they banned from doing anything. Even with things like social things like gathering people, making food for the people in the street, they banned them even from doing these simple things. So that's a very clear sign that's happened in the recent years and not in the past. That's very clear sign there is more discrimination recently. The third point, which is I think is very important, because the Saudi committee, they say it and they claim, and also the authority, they keep claiming the Shia minority, they are participating in the legal system, and there is judges from the Shia, which is completely not true. There is some judges in some institute which is not completely court. We can't describe it as a court. When the regime, they said there's a court and they are judges, it's completely couldn't be described as that. This institution, they just publishing like a statement which is advisory statements, so it's not compulsory, it's completely different than any other courts. And what the judges said there, or the people they appointed in these institutions, it is coming to the just focus to the Shia minority if there is issues between them, and if they decided to go to this institution or to this committee, but if they want to have enforcement for this statement or for this judgment, nobody will do the enforcement like any other courts. So it is completely advisory. And the other issue with this institution or with this committee, they described it as a court, which is completely not a court. The other issue, all the judges or all the leaders, they are appointed by the regime. So they have not been chosen by the minority itself. So they already lost the credibility. They already, most of the minority, they don't have the trust with those community. And they have their own issue with their community. The third thing, they have been used also by the regime to ban several cultures with the Shia minority. So if the regime want to ban anything with the Shia minority, they always come with this institute to pass it through, to say it is coming within the Shia minority, and everyone know it's coming from the authority from up to down. So this is the main issues with this institution specifically, and it is very important to understand which it is not a court, they are not judges, they are not chosen by the community, they are not chosen by the Shia, they are chosen, appointed by the regime, they are not independent, and they don't have the credibility. And they don't have the enforcement to enforce if there's any statement. So why I'm enforcing that? Because the regime, the authority, and the Human Rights Committee, they keep saying everywhere there is judges and there is their own court, which is completely not true. The last point that I want to mention, in the Saudi curriculum, the religious curriculum, it used to be against the Shia minority. However, if they deleted or edited something, it is still against them by somehow, even if there is some modification. And if they want to have their religious study in the Husseiniya or in their mosques, they ban them completely from doing that. And that's for some of them to go overseas and to study outside the country. And if they travel, for example, for religious reason to study in Iran or Iraq, they come back to the country and they have been arrested and we have seen several cases, they have been arrested. They said they went there for spying on the country, or they met some religious group in Iraq or in Iran, while they banned them to have these studies inside the country. So in summary, the discrimination is increased, but the regime changed their behavior to keep trying to hide this discrimination and to use some of those people against their people, just to use them as image, as well as they are doing with women, and as Dr. Maria mentioned.
Thank you, for painting that picture of the discrimination that the Shia minority is facing. And it's also interesting to hear, because there seems to be that similarity that the authority has the tactics of appointing people from the communities to sort of shine a better light on them. I think. And
one more point that will show the real discrimination with the Shia minority. If we check the people in the death row or the executions, we will see it's very clear there is discrimination against the Shia minority. They said they have been protests on the street. However, protesting on the street, this is something, this is basic rights. This is the first thing. The second thing, there is several people, they have been accused or they have been forced to admit committing some violence. But the investigation and the trial was not fair trial. All the way for the trial, it was not fair. The third thing, there is several minors that have been executed because of things that's happened when they were minors. So this is something special with executions that will show more violations against this group of people. So.
Okay, maybe we'll get a chance to speak a bit more about also the minors on the death row afterwards. Joey, Human Rights Watch has just released a report on the fate of migrant workers in Saudi Arabia in the context of the Giga projects. Could you give us an overview of how migrant workers are treated in Saudi Arabia, and maybe what projects could be most dangerous to them?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for hosting this important session. So a few weeks ago, we released a report looking at, we called our sort of baseline study on migrant workers in Saudi Arabia. Obviously, Human Rights Watch and Amnesty have been looking at this issue for many years, but the Saudi government in 2021 passed the Labor Reform Initiative, and often boast that they have taken great steps to improve the condition of migrant workers in the country. So we wanted to sort of take a deep dive and take them at their word and actually look at the abuses or not facing workers. And unfortunately, we found the report was based off of nearly a year of research. We spoke to nearly 200 migrant workers and unfortunately found that they are still experiencing systemic and widespread labor abuses across a range of employment sectors in the country and geographic regions. So it's not concentrated in one place or another, and we really tried to speak to workers who from different parts of the country in different sectors. And the main issues facing migrant workers are wage theft, exorbitant recruitment fees, lack of health and safety protections, particularly around extreme heat and unexplained deaths, which I can get into later, and a lack of job mobility, so an inability to easily switch between employers, and also passport confiscation and difficulty leaving Saudi Arabia. And we looked at the Labor Reform Initiative, and we found that particularly on the issue of job mobility, Saudi authorities have boasted quite specifically that they have made it easier for migrant workers to change employers. We found that this was not in fact the case, that many workers employers are still granted an inordinate amount of power over their workers, and workers still experience extreme difficulty in changing jobs. We also, like I said, found that there are still exorbitant recruitment fees, leading to a situation of effective debt bondage. And this is, of course, amounts to forced labor under international labor law. We also found that many of these abuses were present in high-profile giga projects, such as NEOM, and other projects related to Vision 2030. And I can get into the question, given that I haven't checked the news in the last 30 minutes, but I would expect that by now Saudi Arabia has been awarded the 2034 World Cup, and so this raises very serious questions over the next 10 years. What will the situation be for migrant workers who will be the ones building the 11 stadiums that will be built from scratch needed to service the 2034 World Cup? One other thing that's important from the report is that in the last 6 months of this year alone, we found that there were nearly 900 unexplained deaths of Bangladeshi migrant workers. And this was a big problem in Qatar, also a big problem in Saudi Arabia, where these migrant workers die and there's not sufficient autopsies done afterwards. And we have very little ability to, number one, ascertain and understand how they died. And often death from issues like extreme heat is very difficult to assess. So we don't really have, it's one thing if a migrant worker falls and is killed on a construction site that way, but the longer term health impacts of laboring under extreme heat are really difficult to get a sense of the full scope, given, of course, many issues, lack of access and difficulties, fear of reprisals when you speak to workers and their families, and the lack of access they themselves have to the bodies of their loved ones who have passed away.
Thank you. And I think, we're talking about a very large group of people here as well. I think it's an estimated 13.4 million migrant workers in Saudi Arabia at the moment. But this number is going to increase significantly if and when the World Cup stadiums are going to be built, and also as part of the mega and giga projects happening in Saudi at the moment. As we're talking about those mega projects, I turn to you to ask about the case of the local tribal population displaced by the NEOM project. ALQST has done some very important primary research and has published a report called The Dark Side of NEOM. Could you tell us more about their fate?
Yep. The Saudi regime, first of all, they tried to build like a new cities out of nowhere, while they have lack of services in the main cities. So while the people struggling in the main cities, they have ambition and dreams to build the city, and they said there's nobody there, and they went to this area to kick out the tribes without paying them anything, or if they pay someone, they will pay something not enough to move them from the desert to the city. They paid some of them 300 or 320, and some of them they get nothing. There is something was legalized in the Saudi system in the past. If you don't have a court document, and if you don't have the land documents or documents for your land from the Saudi regime, and you have something before the Saudi regime, that's mean tribal thing that you have it from before, or something from the Ottoman Empire, and you still have these documents, or you have the evidence that belong to your tribe, that was considered in the Saudi regime and in the Saudi courts. Recently, with Mohammed bin Salman, with most of the projects that in the south of the country, or in Awamiya, or in Jeddah, or mainly right now with Neom, they don't accept any of these documents, and they just accept the Saudi documents, even if these tribes available in this land before even the Saudi regime controlling the country. So this is one of the main issue, and that's the tribe. They tried their best to talk to the regime, but unfortunately, they promised them several times they will solve the issue. Then suddenly they asked them to evacuate their land, and it was by force. And we have seen people have been killed, like Al-Huwaitat have been killed in front of the camera, and if there's others, they have been killed without that's documented. There's nobody knows about it, and there's people also in the death row because they rejected or they have been opposed the project. This is one of the main issue that the people they have faced, and the other thing that we have seen the labor issue and the other issue, but for the tribes, this is the main issue, and until now, they have not even trying to solve the issues, stopping the executions, or even trying to sit with the tribe, trying to pay them enough money, at least for their land and their houses, and to pay them something enough to move them to the cities.
Thank you.
Please. I think so. Yahya talked about how for the Shi'as there's always representatives showcasing the lack of the non-discrimination of this group, and for women, same thing. For the Huwaitat, it happened as well. They actually used the most prominent sheikhs of the tribe to counter the protests, and to make them say officially that they've been compensated legally, that everything was done with the consent of the tribe. So again, we see that this the way the authorities behave to cover up the abuses is almost in every field.
Yeah, interesting to see this sort of strategy being used in the different fields.
Can I add something?
Of course,
Yeah.
please.
As Lina said, there is people, because we have seen this with the Western media, they said, yeah, there is some people say everything going well, but there's other people, they are angry, and they feel there is two different point of view. But the main thing that we want to highlight, if there is people, they have been paid, and they have been get protection from the regime, and they encouraged by the regime, or maybe forced by the regime to say something. The other people, they struggle and they fight to say the other thing. That means we don't have two group of people, two equal group of people. There is the regime, they will be able, if there is violation against 100 person, they will manage to silence 99%. But if someone able to talk, that means we need to listen to them. Because if someone with this struggle, with this danger, talk, that means there is something wrong. So it's not about two different opinions between the tribe or two different opinions between the women, some of them with MBS, some of women against MBS. It's not like that, because in Saudi Arabia, and this is very important to mention it, especially the Western media, we don't have the freedom of speech to consider it is two points of view.
I was also just going to say as well that part of the reason why we're able to get so many testimonies from migrant workers is because throughout the migration cycle, they return home. So we were able to safely take these testimonies when they were back in their country of origin, and not subject to surveillance and everything. And we were speaking about this the other day, but I do think as the scrutiny on the World Cup gets ever greater as we go forward, we'll also, there's already pressure on migrant workers. There's no right to create a union, and all these are inextricably linked to freedom of expression as well. But I think on all these issues, migrant workers also will experience more pressure to not be able to speak like groups like us sitting here today.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe just to illustrate what Yahya was saying about, it's not about two groups having different opinions on one subject. So, for example, for women's rights, so I always give this example because I think it really shows what's happening in the country. So when Jane was imprisoned and she was tortured, she was not allowed to have any independent monitors visiting her. And when my family found out about the torture, they really pushed hard to have someone visit Jane to have like an official statement that Jane had been tortured. And so after months and months of trying, finally the Saudi Human Rights Commission visits Jane. And my sister shows them her body. They see that she was tortured. They took notes of everything, and they leave the Jane in prison, and they actually deny the torture. And then one of the members of that delegation that visited Jane, who's a woman, was promoted as ambassador, a Saudi ambassador to Norway. So what the world sees is, oh wow, a Saudi female ambassador in Norway, things are changing. But not knowing that the story behind is that she had to deny the torture of a feminist activist. So it's not about having two visions of one topic. No, it's either you are fully for the rights of this discriminated group, or you're against them. Really, no, it cannot be nuanced, in my opinion. So
just to add to Lina, and it's freedom of expression never existed in Saudi Arabia. But it became worse and worse and worse and worse in the time of the Crown Prince. And Jane is a good example of what he was doing. The day they allowed driving, also imprisoned all of them. And the message was clear. You don't ask for it. You are not free to ask for those changes. I give it to you, and you should be grateful for that. And people are scared to speak, and that's the Western media, when they publish those articles saying that system change and that the opposition is saying that, they are enabling a repression in the system. They are actually playing to their PR mission, which is showing that there is a change using women, migrants, worker, and all of that just to show that there is a change.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, and that shows the contradiction very clearly. Like, you introduce women's rights reform, and at the same time you arrest and detain and torture the women pioneers, of the country. Lina, you mentioned something on the National Human Rights Commission. I think they always play quite a central role in these reviews at the UN as well. So you mentioned before that usually there is kind of a debrief from the committee with civil society and another debrief with the National Human Rights Commission. But from what I understand, the National Human Rights Commission is this double-faced actor that sometimes presents itself as an independent national human rights institution, and at other times they're part of the state delegation. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about them. Because I also know MENA Rights Group in ALQST, they did a report on
So we
this.
did a report that's called the Saudi Human Rights Commission, a whitewashing tool of the kingdom. So yeah, there are a couple of points. I think it's about the structure of the commission. It's a commission that is under governmental ministries. It's also a commission where the king appoints its members. It's a commission that, we cannot say that it's independent. But what's interesting to see is that how they present themselves. So sometimes they present themselves as the Saudi National Human Rights Institution, which is supposed to be an independent human rights institution monitoring the situation of the country, and sometimes also being the one giving the feedback on some topics, including at the CEDAW. At the CEDAW, they were there as the state, basically, not as the National Human Rights Institution. But in their discourse, so Al-Huwaitat, when she was she's the president of the Human Rights Commission, when she was giving the statement, at some point she mentioned the Paris principles, that are the Paris principles are the principles that oversee a national human rights institution and how it should be operating. So they then, because there was a question about the Saudi Human Rights Commission, so it's very vague how they present themselves, whether they're governmental or if they're independent. So they play this game as well, but they're clearly not independent. And it's even worse than this. I've talked about the commission denying torture, but also their very existence is problematic because it is used by the Saudi authorities in some of the responses at the UN when states ask to justify some of the abuses, to cover up the abuses. For example, they would say, yeah, but when someone asks about a political prisoner that is forcibly disappeared, the Saudi state would say, no, it's not true that he is forcibly disappeared because the Saudi Human Rights Commission visited him. So, their very existence is used to cover up some abuses. And this was the case with Abdulrahman al-Sakhan, for example. In the Saudi response to the UN communication on his enforced disappearance, they respond saying that the Saudi Human Rights Commission visited him, stating the wrong prison. That's first thing, so we see that how far it goes. Just using them to cover up the abuses. And the Saudi Human Rights Commission itself also, it's not only that they're used, they're also proactively playing that game to cover up the abuses. And we're not saying that they should not exist, but at least show some good faith and meet with us. We have things to tell you, we have things to talk about, and they've never accepted to meet Saudi civil society. Never. So,
And us also, we're going to the IGF, I'm going on Saturday, and the number of emails and meeting requests that we have sent to the Human Rights Commission over the last few months, I feel like I'm a jealous girlfriend, chasing them. We sent official letters drafted by our director from our official HRW MENA email. I followed up personally, trying to get different numbers, and this is just for a meeting. Human Rights Watch will be the first time we're sending official delegation to Saudi Arabia in nearly 10 years at a forum that is about internet governance and speaks about human rights, and the theme of it, and Saudi Arabia is the official host. You would think that at minimum the National Human Rights Commission would be able to take a 30-minute meeting with Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. I know that Amnesty has also been trying to meet with them as well, and they won't even respond to an email. So,
So as it stands, it's more a whitewashing tool of the authorities than anything.
Or just an email inbox that has no one on the other side of it. That's how we've experienced it.
Yeah. Maybe just Joey, because I know you guys have also published another report on the Public Investment Fund and how that is discriminating also, or is sort of involved in human rights violations that also concern minorities. If you could tell us a little bit about this.
Absolutely. So it's a long report and there's many different parts to it, but I think Just sort of building on what Yahya was saying a little while ago, for me, one of the most compelling parts of the report was our linkages with this massive fund, nearly $1 trillion fund, $1 trillion in Saudi state wealth, the vast majority of which comes from the transfer of shares of Aramco into the PIF. Aramco is, of course, built off of oil and gas wealth in Saudi Arabia, and peoples have a sovereignty over natural resources in the country. So this is natural resource wealth that's being transferred into a public investment fund, and our assessment that this state money, this public money, that should belong to the people of Saudi Arabia, they have no ability to spend, direct, or control their own resources. We did an analysis of its governance structure, and we found that ultimately Mohammed bin Salman himself is the decision maker, exercises near unilateral control. Not even the Saudi government, just one person exercises unilateral control over $1 trillion. And then when we look at giga projects like NEOM, Jeddah Central Development Project, Live Gulf, even 2034 World Cup, just billions and billions and billions of dollars being invested in the line without any sort of ability for Saudi citizens and residents to engage as to whether this is the path forward that they would want for how their public resources are being spent. And as Yahya mentioned, Mohammed bin Salman is creating these sort of castles in the desert out of nothing, investing huge amount of resources when there are huge amounts of poverty and inequality inside of Saudi cities already. So we looked at a report by the UN from last year that found that 1 in 7 Saudi citizens live under the poverty line, and this report, given the lack of data on poverty, that the Saudi government doesn't produce any data on poverty or inequality, but this was based off of purely the household data of Saudi citizens, and it was 1 in 7, and this didn't even include the 42% of migrant workers or other undocumented people who are, of course, the most economically marginalized in the country. So, in fact, poverty rates are much higher. So it begs this question of, one 39-year-old man has all of this control over wealth while many Saudi citizens are living in poverty and don't have access to that.
Thank you. And I think that, kind of bringing that back, what you said about all this wealth being in the hands of one person and the people not having any say, I think when we talk about, that reform agenda by the authorities, and I think, all the speakers here have spoken about how the reality looks very different. I guess that's a very central point, like the people have no say in any of that. These are limited, insufficient reforms, top down, and as long as the people of Saudi Arabia cannot, be part of developing reform that is needed for the country, that reform will be and will remain insufficient. Maybe we want to open up the floor to some questions. Don't know if there are any questions in the room. Yes?
Hi all, thanks for your valuable insights. I've just been tuning in a little bit to the World Cup vote, and as Joey alluded to, no surprise, Saudi has just been awarded it, despite obviously a heavily flawed bid, which failed to address a whole range of grave risks. Some of the most immediate, which relate to migrant worker rights, of course, but there are many other risks relating to freedom of expression, forced displacement, and discrimination, and the sort of themes you've talked about today. I guess now it is going ahead. What do you think are some of the most pressing reforms, relating to the issues you've raised today, and how can that be sort of tied into the World Cup process in your view?
I would like to give an answer to this.
I can take it from the migrant worker angle. I think the clearest, most direct connection between 2034 and human rights violations our labor rights, just given the vast amount of construction that will need to happen over the next 10 years. And what's kind of the most devastating to me is the fact that there could definitely be a World Cup in Saudi Arabia in 2034 where no migrant workers die, where they are adequately compensated, where they are not subject to debt bondage. That world is very possible to exist in Saudi Arabia. Its wealth funds and all of the companies that are going to partner with FIFA have the ability to make that happen. There is enough money to go around to make sure that every single worker who comes from Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan, India is paid for the work that they're doing, and that also benefits them economically, because we're not saying that the kafala system, or we're not saying that labor migration to Saudi Arabia is in itself a bad thing. Absolutely not. These workers need those economic opportunities, and Saudi Arabia has them, and they also have the resources to adequately compensate them and not subject them to other types of violations. So what's devastating is this world is possible, but bad actors like FIFA are not doing what they need to do in order to make that world possible. If FIFA itself also wanted to pressure Saudi authorities to be like, look, you guys have to actually reform things, of course Mohammed bin Salman would do that, because the World Cup is important enough for him to have to showcase, himself, that he would, begrudgingly perhaps, but he would do it. So I think for me that's the most difficult thing to consider. Of course we're at the beginning of 10 years, so it's a long process. I do believe that there will be positive reforms because of the work that we in a coalition will do. I think it will be very difficult, but yeah, for me that's the most immediate, direct link between this event and rights abuses.
I agree with everything Joey said, and saying that Saudi Arabia has the resources to compensate them fairly, they also, why would they spend millions of dollars on PR companies to cover up, the abuses, rather than really, structurally and work on the foundational problem of the kafala system and the abuse of migrant workers? As Joey said, they have the resources. I really don't understand what is, what the obstacle they see in this. I would say, so of course migrant workers are a priority, and this world is possible, and we can, see change very fast, I think. We just need political will, and FIFA has to push for it, and football associations as well. The second thing, I think, when it comes to Saudi citizens and residents, I would say, I don't know, but maybe this is how I see it, and I have time to evolve in 10 years. I would say the priority now for us is not to talk about reforms instead of us. So what we want is for political prisoners to be released, in order for civil society to be able to do the work, for the Saudi people inside the country to ask for what they see as priorities. So what's important is really to prioritize the release of all political prisoners. Al-QST has a database of political prisoners, and it's very difficult work we do because, again, prisons cannot be visited. We don't have any independent monitors in Saudi Arabia. Human rights organizations, Joey's going to the IJF next week, but it's a UN-hosted event, so it's not really going to Saudi Arabia as Human Rights Watch to document things on the ground for Human Rights Watch. But so, I beg everyone who wants to know how to push for change for these coming 10 years, ask for the release of our political prisoners. I'm not saying that it's the level of Syria, but seeing footage out of Syria's prisons has been very devastating and very heartbreaking, and we do not have access to the prisons. We don't know what happens in these prisons. So I do hope that everyone understands that it can be frustrating for us to see that the world will be going to Saudi Arabia and enjoying it for a couple of weeks and just leaving it as is, and with the Saudi people not having any protection in all of that. So I would say first the release of political prisoners, and and the end of arbitrary arrest for free speech, so that people can actually say what they want. And again, the third thing is for access to the country by independent human rights organizations to be able to document the violations, to advocate, and also to visit our political prisoners.
Can I add just one thing? I absolutely agree with everything. And for media, for politicians, for everyone who actually enabled the Saudi regime for years now, it's the chance now. You have 10 years, show us your goodwill. Advocate. We are not saying don't attend the football match. If you want, attend it, it's up to you. But you have the chance for 10 years to advocate for the issues. It's like what Tina said. It's not 2 weeks, you go and attend the football match and come back and just ignore it. And especially that we know how desperate Saudi Arabia is to show that the football World Cup goes well. So especially for politicians, instead of going and attending the match and doing nothing about it, it's time to put the pressure on Saudi regime.
No response. No, I think these are really good, clear demands.
I want to say to stop the execution and to stop the death penalty, but the issue there is no comprehensive reform. So they will stop the execution, but they will kill the people inside the prisons, like what's happened with Dr. Abdul Hamid or Dr. Musa Al-Qarni or others. So it's need to be something comprehensive with the reform. And the first thing for the reform, I think, free the prisoner of conscience. If there is any country have any prisoner of conscience, even if it's just one person, that means there is no reform at all.
Yeah. No, I think sort of very clear and clear demands to what needs to happen in the coming years and the run-up to what has now been announced, World Cup 34 happening in Saudi Arabia. Don't know if any of the panelists want to, I think it's already a good conclusion, but maybe someone wants to have some sort of final comments.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Final comment. I think in the last years there were pressure on the Saudi regime, especially after the murder for Jamal Khashoggi, and we have seen some results of that. Yes, it was not fantastic, and the violation is still there, but there is some results. However, the world right now, they start to normalize, and we believe the violations increased, especially with we have seen the executions keep increasing all the time, and also silence the people inside the countries keep increasing. So if anyone say the Saudi regime, they learned the lesson and they stopped the violations, they learned nothing, and they know that the world, they just being vocal after the violation and being silent later on. So this is the lesson that the regime learned. So the only thing that we believe on, they will not stop the violations unless if there is a pressure. And we need a real pressure, especially from the allies, that they keep enhancing the regime and they keep enhancing the regime to do the violations.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a good note to end on. So international pressure really is needed and can make a difference. And on that note, I'd like to thank everyone for attending and wish you a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.